Okay, why is economics important? So let's say, and I was kind of hinting at this with my discussion of that dude Ron Paul, the dude from the last slide. Let's say you have a philosophical value. Wow. Let's say you have a philosophical value. I want to maximize equality. An economist can tell you how to get there. Or if you have a philosophical value, I want to maximize rights. And let's say I want to, have the optimal amount of national defense and road building with the minimal amount of taxation. An economist can tell you how to get there. That's what's called a positive question. How do you get to your objective? How do you meet your objective? Okay. A normative question is essentially deciding what your objective is. Normatives are your philosophy. Okay. So if you're looking back at that study on minimum wage, a normative question might be, should we implement a minimum wage in order to increase fairness in society? Okay. It's philosophical in nature. Should we because it's fair versus should we not because maybe it's not fair? A positive question would be like, all right, let's say you want to increase, so given that you have a philosophical value, an objective to increase fairness, will the minimum wage actually get you to your objective, right? So a positive question would be, will the minimum wage increase or decrease unemployment? Okay, it's something that can be tested. It's something that has a yes or no answer, and you can put conditions on the yes or no answer, but ultimately it's something that can be studied and you can say yes or no to. Is the minimum wage fair? Is not something that can be studied. It can be evaluated. You can use positive question to inform the normative question. You can say, is the minimum wage fair? No, because it increases unemployment. Or you can say the minimum wage is fair because it does not increase unemployment. But if you're saying, is it fair to, generate a policy to increase equality across the board, that's ultimately a philosophical question because, there's philosophy involved when you're taxing someone else. There's philosophy involved when you're providing social programs to some but not others. So you can inform the philosophy with a positive question. You can say minimum wage does or does not increase unemployment, but at the end of the day, there's going to be philosophy involved, and that's what's called the normative question. So economics can get you your positive questions. It can study, does minimum wage increase unemployment? Does inflation decrease unemployment? Does having Social Security increase taxes? Does it increase taxes for the young? And do the young ultimately see a benefit from Social Security? That's all things that can be tested. That's all things that can be measured in one way or another, and you can have a yes or no answer to that. Should we have a Social Security question? Should we have a Social Security program in order to, make sure that nobody retires without income? Is more of a philosophical question. That's more of a normative question. Anything that involves should is more normative. Anything that involves is more positive. So economics tends to focus on the positive questions, things that can be answered positively. Okay, economics is partially falsifiable in the sense of you can generate your study. It can tell you, the minimum wage under this condition in this particular study did not increase unemployment. And then someone might say, but Pennsylvania and New Jersey, they're not really as close as we think. And your matching function wasn't as good as you thought it was, or your assumptions weren't done, weren't quite the best assumptions to make. I have a separate study, and it actually shows me this. Okay, that's partially falsifiable. You can have a debate about the underlying assumptions. You can have a debate about the methodology that will say yes or no. This answer might be better or worse. Okay, the minimum wage might or might not increase unemployment, and you put conditions on that. It's not really falsifiable to say no, equality is bad, or no, taxing someone in order to make equality is also bad. Like those two things are philosophical in nature. They're not falsifiable. They're almost opinions, right? And they'll depend on like your life circumstances and what you've experienced and what you've seen other people experience, and they might be informed by positive questions and partially falsifiable questions, but at the end of the day, they're unique to you and what you believe, right? So normative questions are not falsifiable at all. Economics is broadly applicable, so you can take an economics question and economics methodology, and you can apply it to things that aren't economics, right? 20 years ago, healthcare economics wasn't a thing. Behavioral economics wasn't a thing. Healthcare was healthcare. Psychology was psychology. Nowadays, you're looking at economics, with a broader lens. Donation is one of them, right? 20 years ago, wouldn't have been economics. How to maximize your votes relative to a certain assumptions about how voters are lined up across the spectrum. That wasn't economics 20 years ago. Now it kind of is. Things like how to deter nuclear wars actually dates back longer. That's 60 years considered economics. Kind of economic methodologies being applied to sciences that we never would have thought of. There's a whole discipline now in biology called behavioral game theory, where they'll look at how let's say you have bats who want to mate, and they'll look at how they interact based on economic principles, which is kind of baffling or baffling. I got the puns. But economics is almost a methodology that can be applied to a lot of different fields. It's all about you have a budget and you want to maximize your objective, subject to that budget. And that whole concept of economics being applied to non-economic fields is what some people might call economic imperialism. Things like biology being taken over by economic methodologies. You see it a lot in sociology and political economics, or political science, where they'll start using economic models and methodologies, and people won't be happy about it because it kind of economics has certain assumptions based around it that might not be the prevailing assumptions of the field. And I think it's good to have both. I think it's good to look at traditional economic topics with, let's say, a sociological lens, seeing looking at things like class structure and that kind of thing is important, even if it's not traditionally economics. And in the same vein, I think it's important to have quantitative budget constraint based methodologies when you're dealing with things like sociology and class consciousness in that sense. So kind of the fields are almost kind of merging in some sort of sense, but they're very distinct, and I think the biases that economists and sociologists have. And you'll see that in the next slide, where you'll see basically in the next slide I'm going to go through what a sociologist would say and what an economist would say in response. And then I think economics is incredibly important for building your skill set. So, okay, it's in the next slide. Economics is incredibly important for building your skill set. It's this broad level of quantitative and conceptual skills that you're going to get that are, useful in many different fields. The other day, I was listening to like someone recap a fitness paper, and they started talking about something called diminishing marginal utility. That is an economics concept being applied to a fitness paper. Or like, the idea of like what I said with being able to budget your macronutrient intake relative to calories. That's an economic skill that I learned that I'm applying to fitness, and that I think whether people know it or not, who are in fitness, they're applying to themselves. They're not thinking of it as economics, but it is. So there are broad skills that you can get from economics that I want you to apply in this course, and that even if you're not using it in an economic context, is just having the algebra, just having the graphs, graphical like logic, I think is important. And like I said, I test quantitatively for a reason. I think it's the most important thing you're going to get out of this course, and I refuse to take it out of this course even during COVID times. And I apologize if it gives you strife doing them, but it's just too important to take out. All right, so what are the things in the economics toolbox? Logic. So logic dates back to those early political economists that I had talked about earlier. They're looking at things like how do people behave under certain conditions. And they weren't thinking about it quantitatively, they were just thinking about it logically. And you still have this applied to kind of, off the side economists will still look at this in like a branch called Austrian economics, which, despite the name, isn't, based in Austria anymore. It's just developed by, a couple dudes who originally came from Austria, or who had like a school in Austria. But they'll look at things like unemployment, and they'll look at it completely logically based. How do people behave? It's called praxeology. But even outside of that, like mainstream economists will use logic, and they'll almost use a quantitative logic. So they'll take assumptions on rationality, and they'll apply to their methodology. So there are two types of logic. You have induction. Inductions, you start with a theory and then you confirm it with evidence. So one like the classical cases of induction is called the gray duck principle, or I think it's the black swan principle. That's what it is. So I had never seen, so like in Scotland or wherever when it was first being created, every swan that they saw was white. So someone theorized, okay, all swans are white. Then like 20 years later, someone saw a black swan. Like, okay, I guess that theory's out the window. So you start with a theory, confirm it with evidence, and then if you find the other evidence to overturn it, you have to reappraise the theory. So 99% of swans are white, 1% of swans are black. Okay, that would be a falsifiable or partially falsifiable theory where you adjust the theory given new evidence. Alternatively, I fucked up. I'm going to stop here.